Hello, I'm Phelim McAleer.
And I'm Anne McElhenney.
And welcome to the Anne and Phelim Scoop. Let's get straight on with the show. On this week's Scoop, we're joined for a Zoom interview with James from all the way from the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. James Delingpole, who James you know him well, but on his Twitter he is known as the Professor Dr. Sir James Delingpole OMQC. I'm not sure all those qualifications are genuine, but James works for Breitbart, The Spectator, and he brings us up to date on how the UK seems to be becoming a nation of coronavirus Nazis with increasing encroachment on freedoms and increased snitching on your neighbours. And we discuss whether the coronavirus is finally going to destroy the media and why the media might deserve it.
And we have some questions for the supreme leader of China, Xi Jinping. I looked up how to say that properly, by the way. You can look those things up on the internet and the interwebs. And we're looking at a very good article from the weekend from Niall Ferguson, not to be confused with Neil Ferguson of the Imperial College. Niall Ferguson, who writes for the Sunday Times, who gives us a series of questions we need to not ever stop asking China, even if we don't get an answer. And we're asking about why it is that a US surgical mask factory is not working 24/7. And yes, it is connected to China.
So first of all,
we have two very delightful Trump derangement syndrome stories. And I think at the end, if we remember, I want to put a little photograph of a cat for your moment of zen, because we've discovered that our cats actually need face masks to. But anyway, I'll put the photograph up at the end.
Yes. So first of all, let's go to James Delingpole. You've probably seen him on the show before. He's been an expert on Brexit, an expert on many things. This interview was recorded just before we came on air. As we were recording, we were not aware of the news that UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson is in intensive care. So bear that in mind as you listen to us discuss it, that we were unaware of that information at the time. Let's go now over to the interview. James Delingpole, you won't want to miss this. It covers a lot of topics with a lot of fun. So let's hear the interview. And here we are with James. Good to see you. And you want to introduce our esteemed guest from across the pond?
So we're joined today by our esteemed colleague from across the pond, James Delingpole. James Delingpole is the host of the Delingpod podcast. He writes for Breitbart News, The Spectator and Die Weltwoche. And according to himself on his Twitter feed, he is still right about everything. Hello, James.
Hi, how you doing, guys? Love to see you. I'm wondering who's living in the most fascist country at the moment. I think probably California is edging it, isn't it? I think, closing down 25 miles of beaches and fining surfers.
Excuse me, and paddle boarders. Now, my first question to you was, the Queen has spoken. The Prime Minister of Great Britain has been hospitalised. The whole world is on a lockdown. Is this the worst script ever or the best script ever for the next dystopian movie?
It is kind of unreal, isn't it? I mean, I don't know how long this has been going on, but I'm still waiting for the moment where I wake up and find it was all a terrible dream. I don't know. I think this is a kind of crap apocalypse, isn't it? I mean, when you see apocalypses in the movie, there genuinely is this kind of huge meteorite coming towards the earth, or I don't know, the whole of the world gets completely frozen and you can see all the icicles and stuff and the polar bears, and yet here we are, we've got this kind of, I almost call it a sort of fake apocalypse. Is that, am I being unfair? I mean, I don't want to be flippant. I know people are dying, but nevertheless, I think the cure is way worse than the disease.
I think what's happened is that it's showing up Hollywood and science fiction writers. I suppose they need drama, but it's showing them up. Basically, human beings behave really well when the back is against the wall. There's no rape, there's no pillage. There's
no rape or pillage yet.
There's no. The worst thing they can say is that they hoard toilet paper. So the movies have got it wrong. The end of the world does not come around and we misbehave. In fact, we behave. The people who are misbehaving
are on paddle boards.
yeah, the people who are misbehaving are the people who are chasing the people on paddle boards. The people who misbehave are the people who are stopping, as that copper in Britain. We'll put that video up now of a copper in Britain. Just watch this video here.
It's chalk.
Somebody done a beautiful picture, Trafalgar Square. It went to court, it was all chalk, and the magistrate still convicted him because it doesn't have to be permanent.
Were they trying to separate?
The law still applies.
Were they doing it for people's safety?
Doesn't matter.
That you're comfortable giving a ticket for a lady that's making sure the community stays alive, and she puts a removable paint on the pavement. Correct?
It's still an offence.
You're comfortable with that?
Yes, sir.
No problem,
because
sir.
the law is the law. It doesn't change just because of what's happening. Otherwise, there'll be anarchy in the world.
So yeah, that's the copper who was telling the lady at the chip shop that she couldn't put chalk marks on the road to keep her customers safe because it's vandalism in it.
Yeah, but come on, Phelim. I mean, be reasonable. You can't have chalk marks on the pavement, right, left, and center, or on the sidewalk, as you'd call it in America, right, left, and center, can you? I mean, that is the road to anarchy. Let's face it.
It starts with the sidewalk, with the and the next thing you know, people are clapping without permission. Yeah.
Yes. And next thing they'll be walking in the hills and the Pennines, walking their dogs. I mean, you've had drone surveillance, cops. What is wrong with so let's take a step back. Let's take a step back. You say maybe the cure is worse than the disease. I mean, tell us about this cure that you're having in Britain. Is it similar to what they're bringing in here, and what's your problem with it?
I think the cure is the same pretty much across the Western world. I think Brazil, our hero Jair Bolsonaro, is holding out against this madness. But even Trump has been cut. I think I liken it to Anthony Fauci. Reminds me of Wormtongue in Lord of the Rings. He seems to have put King Theoden, in other words, President Trump, under some kind of spell, and he's persuaded him that America must remain locked down until nobody is infected. Well, that could be what, next year maybe, and we've got the same in the UK. The solution to COVID-19 or China or Wu flu or whatever you want to call it seems to be total socialism, the total socialization of the economy. I mean, in the UK, for example, we have a rather sinister personality cult sort of stroke national religion. So if you lived in North Korea, you would worship Kim Jong-un, wouldn't you? Over here, we worship those three letters NHS, which stands for National Health Service. And even our beloved Queen was roped into this last night. I mean, she gave one of her, apparently she's only ever given 4 of these emergency crisis speeches in her reign. And she mentioned, the first speech she'd ever given was in 1940 with her sister, which shows how far back she goes and how many crises she's witnessed. And the Queen was very good. I mean, I love the Queen. You're probably Republicans, but I think she's great. But I thought the scriptwriter had sort of hijacked our Queen to sort of give a bit of National Health Service propaganda promo. I don't like socialized medicine. I don't like our creaking, sclerotic, corruption-prone healthcare system. I think there are many better ways of allocating health. I've got massive respect for the doctors and nurses, risking their life on the front line. If you get exposed to this coronavirus, if you get a heavy viral load, it does mean that you are in danger of dying. So respect to the workers, no respect whatsoever for the National Health Service. Every week we have this kind of clap for the NHS. I hope the NHS gets the clap. I don't want the NHS and dies of it. I don't like the NHS. I think it's a monstrosity.
These are words that I don't hear myself saying very often. In defence of Her Majesty, she did say carers. Did she use the word NHS? She did say NHS and carers, or she just didn't say NHS. There was an acknowledgement that there's a world outside the NHS. I thought. Did you not pick that up?
Yes. No, I agree. It was ambiguous, but whoever was in charge of the film footage that went with it showed people in the streets clapping the NHS. They weren't clapping the workers, I don't think. And it's just, you get this mission creep, don't you? You get the Queen wanting to do right by the country, and then you get, was it on the BBC? If it was on the BBC, no wonder. The BBC are a bunch of communists, aren't they, basically?
Absolutely, and I think this is giving one thing about, certainly in America, the media have shown themselves to be irredeemable at this stage.
Oh my God, the media! Don't get me started, Phelim.
No, I want to get you started.
If the people who are, I feel ashamed to be a journalist, or rather I would feel ashamed to be a journalist if I were anything to do with the disgusting MSM, which I'm not, thank God. I mean, the BBC, not just the BBC, but even the conservative newspapers in the United Kingdom, and I'm sure it's the same with America as well, they have been cheerleading this hysteria. They're on this search for, what they really want is to find the youngest victim, the youngest victim with no underlying health conditions. That's their and they wet themselves every time a child dies. It's the best news in the world, because what it means is they can scare their readers into thinking that anyone can get this. It's not just old people, despite all the evidence that it is mainly old and fat people with underlying health. No disrespect to fat people, that's a lifestyle choice, but it is a fact that fat people, obese people are dying above above the standard rate. So are old people. If you're in your 80s, I'm sorry that it's my parents' generation. I love them very much. I don't want them to die, but it is nevertheless a fact that if we are going to deal with this problem, we should really be isolating the at-risk groups, rather than pretending, as the media is, that you are all at risk. And you remember this. We all lived through the 1980s. We remember the AIDS propaganda you got. You were told by the lying governments that AIDS was a disease that affected everyone, whether you were gay or straight. Absolute lie, absolute politically correct propaganda.
I mean, so I remember that, and we were told everyone was 1 in 3 people were going to get it, and basically, I think it was certainly, they talked about, in reality, if you avoided the 3 hitches, you wouldn't get it: hookers, heroin, and homosexuality. I mean, it was a disease in the gay community, injecting drugs, hemophiliacs, I suppose, too.
Were you in Britain at the time? Do you remember what the slogan was? The government slogan was AIDS, don't die of ignorance. And there was the government promoting ignorance. It was putting out lies. Why we've ever trusted the state since then, I do not know. We should not trust the state.
So James, you're saying, we need to pay special attention to, as you call it, fat people and old people. I sense a headline here. Are you advocating internment camps for fat people?
No, I'm not. I'm not. No, I feel sorry for the at-risk groups, because I think that it must be tricky. It must be a very nerve-wracking time right now.
Yeah.
Waiting for the moment when you suddenly develop a temperature and you're thinking, okay, in 6 days' time, that's when the cytokine storm could hit me. That's when I could get pneumonia and drown in my own lungs. I mean, that is drown in my own fluid. That's a very scary thought. I can see why a certain percentage of the population is saying, we want bigger government, we want it now, we love big government, we love all these directives. Why people are turning to what we call over here COVID Nazis, people sort of spying on. We've had parks closed down in London because the COVID Nazis have been saying, well, you can't go out and enjoy the sunshine, you might spread the disease. Well, I can understand if you're if you're in your 20s and you're pretty much not going to die from this thing, and you're sort of feeling kind of immortal, why should you be cooped up in your house when you know that you're not going to get it? I understand that impulse.
Yeah.
It's a difficult balance, isn't it, between authoritarian, if you're going to impose these rules, you've got to do it with the people's consent, because most of us in the West are not used to being told what to do like this.
Yeah. I mean, just to be clear to people, over in the UK, are you calling it the COVID virus over there? Here seems to be the corona virus. What's the...
I think it's a bit pompous calling it COVID-19. I think we call it the coronavirus.
You talked about COVID Nazis, corona Nazis, who are basically And the media seems to be, and they're taking photographs to show, and they did this here too, before the beaches were closed. They took pictures of two groups of people misbehaving. There was thousands of people social distancing on the beach, which you can on the beach in LA. They took two photographs of two groups of people misbehaving, and for those reasons they shut down 25 miles of beaches and put people on the road beside the beach, a small narrow road where everyone's walking now, and it's really crowded and you can't keep 6 feet.
I think some people in the world right now are really, really enjoying this pandemic. They're seeing a crisis and they're turning it into an opportunity. It's Rahm Emanuel in excelsis, and I wonder what the world's going to look like after this. I think that I used to sort of think that people who talked about the sinister global elite, the sort of 1%, the Davos elite, I thought they were kind of conspiracy mongers. But I look at what Bill Gates is up to. I smell a rat. There's a kind of connection between Fauci and Bill Gates and Big Pharma. And I think it's very, very unhealthy for the rest of us. I think we are going to be, not to put a too fine a point on it, we're going to be shat upon by the elite.
Do you think that after this is all over, that the whole world is going to realign or completely reorganize their relationship with China? I mean, you talked critically about the media earlier. I mean, one aspect of the media that I think really deserves some attention is their complete lack of objectivity when it comes to China, and the fact that they parrot all of the Chinese Communist Party talking points without putting an asterisk beside them and saying, oh, by the way, this is a communist tyranny, so we can't trust anything coming out of them. Do you think after this is over, there's going to be a huge change in how we all relate to China? Is that something good that might come out of this?
It's something that happily for his presidential second term prospects, President Trump has been talking about a lot, even before, while the Wu flu was just a sort of a twinkling in its mother's eyes. He was warning about the way that globalization was not necessarily a good thing, because we are now far too dependent on Chinese manufacturing. And I think what was going on in the West, I owe my friend Sarah Vine, who put this thought into my head. She's absolutely right. Just as back in the day, the upper classes in Britain and America depended for their luxurious lifestyle on what was going on in the sugar plantations in the West Indies and so on. So you had slaves propping up their bourgeois lifestyles. In the same way, we've treated China. China has given us this easy standard of living. They've almost become this kind of slave plantation in the East, producing these cheap goods. And in return for this unhealthy relationship, we've turned a blind eye to the human rights issues in China, the organ harvesting, the kind of gulags.
Isn't it wonderful though to see that the United Nations have invited China to sit at the Human Rights Commission? Isn't that a wonderful development?
I love that thing of the guy from the WHO being interviewed and asked about Taiwan, and he suddenly his hearing goes. He can't.
We have to find one of those questions for you, James, where you suddenly start going, can't hear you now, can't hear you now.
Yeah, but signal's lost over Iceland or something. I can't really hear you. So, I mean, we talk about a change in relations, or it could be after 9/11. So the day after 9/11, people probably thought this changes our relationship with the Islamic world. This changes our relationship with Muslims. This makes us, and what it did, yes, it did. It made Islam immune from criticism. It meant you couldn't be against Muslim immigration or you were called a racist. The protected people after 9/11 were not the people who jumped out of the buildings and their relatives. It was the people who it was the compatriots and fellow travelers of the people who flew the planes into the buildings. And I just as we're coming up, and we're on Anne's laptop, and it flashes up news flashes as we're talking here. And I just saw Wired magazine has a headline. which came up there, and it said several Asian countries had beaten the coronavirus, full stop. Then travelers brought it back in again. So we're to blame, So they faked the statistics. They didn't beat it. It devastated their cities. They pretended they beat it, and now they're blaming white Westerners for bringing it back in, and the media is carrying their water for them. So I think this could just make China are the new, Islamophobia. Chinaphobia will be the new word.
I think it's certainly the case. Look, for example, look at what was happening in the UK before the coronavirus outbreak. Boris Johnson's government signed up a 5G contract with Huawei, and the American government and the Australian government were very concerned about this. They said, because the Chinese are going to use this to spy on you. Our intelligence relationship is going to be compromised by this. And then you look who's on the kind of the UK board or the advisory board of Huawei. And you're talking really high-level members of the establishment. For example, I think one of them was Lord Brown, the guy who used to be head of BP. You had senior government ministers. The Chinese, I would imagine that the Japanese and the Nazis, the Germans were very good at that in the 1930s as well. They buy up, they buy up senior members of the establishment in order to get their influence. And don't forget the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. You think about China virtually owns Africa now. It owns all the resources there, which is why, of course, Africa now has a major problem with the Wu flu. You mentioned 9/11, and one of the most interesting podcasts I've ever done, just because it completely blew my mind. I learned so much from it. I look it up. I can't remember the guy's name temporarily, but 3 months to the day after 9/11, an event occurred which is probably even more seismic to geopolitics than 9/11, and that was China's admission to WTO, to the World Trade Organization. Mm-hmm. And what this did was it completely transformed the global economy in a way that has been very deleterious, particularly to the sort of the working classes, people who would normally have had jobs in factories. Yeah. And this was one of Trump's beefs. It's also long been one of Steve Bannon's beefs. He's always gone on about this, and I think that they've called this one right. Yeah. But it stripped out middle America. It deprived people. You need a few, I'd say maybe 5%, no more than that, of kind of university educated people, maybe 10%, not half the population. Maybe. But there's a significant chunk of the population who need, blue collar workers who need real jobs, and they have been impoverished. They have been ruined by the admission of China to WTO. Yeah. So bad stuff was happening with China way, way before the Wu flu.
And no one cared. Like, we used to go to all these meetings, but we went to all those conservative meetings all across America, went to all the behind closed doors, in public, think tanks, every single one of them, from the smallest to the thing. No one ever talked about the damage being done by so-called free trade, which is not free trade. It's unfair trade, and no one ever talked about it. And I mean no one. And anyone, maybe someone might bring it up, but there's always some weirdo with dandruff in the corner.
But it's and further to that point, I'm one factoid that I cannot get over is the fact that that now the realization that now everyone is learning that all of the antibiotics on the whole planet Earth are all made in China, and all the ingredients for all the drugs that are important to us, like things for diabetes, for heart disease, all of them are made in China. And I have a question. I mean, how is that even possible that every government on the planet Earth bought into that? And how it is that the public didn't know? The public didn't know.
Because the media didn't tell them.
Because the media didn't tell them. But I think that's a huge story. And I think that if nothing else happens, it's very funny when it comes to it. Health is so important to people. That is not going to continue. And I think your friend, by the way, I think Miss Fine, I think that's an incredible point she makes. I had thought of that myself and I wish I'd made more of it. But I think it's a really good point. We basically, it's a new slate. We're getting the benefit of a massive plantation because people in China clearly are not, their human rights are not being protected, the workers' rights. I mean, they're working in incredibly polluted situations and no one's saying anything about it. And Greenpeace and all these environmental groups, by the way, who have spent billions and billions of dollars, trying to destroy Great Britain or America and saying that it's hugely polluting, completely turn a blind eye to the polluting that's been going on in China.
No, it's wrong to say they're turning a blind eye. It's wrong. They're actually engineering the pollution of China by putting these ridiculous rules on American industry and American district. So everything has to be made in places where the human rights are not respected. So there is no Greenpeace office in Beijing.
No, do you not think that one of the stories of our lifetime, and we've witnessed it up close and personal because we're all in the same game, has been the death of the media. The media has it's given up on its responsibilities. Journalists just don't do their jobs anymore and haven't done for some time. And you look, for example, at the newspapers, which obviously the internet had a big effect on journalism. It sort of stole a lot of the advertising. It reduced the barriers to entry of who could do journalism and who couldn't and so on. I can see why the old media had real trouble coming to terms with the new age and wondering what its business model might be. But unfortunately, part of its business model seemed to be taking bribe money from China and running special supplements sponsored by the Chinese government. Yeah. And you're thinking, is that what newspapers were doing in the 1930s? Were they taking running advertorial for Herr Hitler's wonderful forward-looking Deutschland, which just wanted a bit of Lebensraum? I'm so ashamed of our media. You've got its failure to hold China account. You've got its abject failure to hold the whole green lunacy to account. Yeah. One of the good things that coming out of this, that maybe, just maybe, it will show people what a real crisis looks like compared to the sort of fake news crisis that is. Yes.
And in fact, if people would like to know more, that I have an opinion piece today or earlier this week in the Daily Wire, just making that exact point. The hundreds of billions of dollars that have been spent on the climate crisis could have been spent preparing for a pandemic, could have been spent researching for cures and vaccines. It wasn't. It was diverted to this fake crisis. Talking about the media, James. If you go on Drudge now, there's always a couple of links about how newspapers are feeling the worst of this, and many newspapers have stopped printing after
you're really
after 150 years. Well, by the way, I don't know, but you, no, but James, I think you're probably like me. In our ink is in our blood, right? All we ever wanted to do was write for newspapers.
My God, it's so true. I loved being on a newspaper back in the day. Yeah, it was fantastic. It was just the best.
We would have done it for free. And often we did. I have to say, I have no empathy. And maybe that's a thing with me, but I have no empathy for these people who are losing their jobs. And that may be a terrible thing, but the journalists, that is. And it's terrible. That goes against everything that I should feel. But, and it wasn't just the mainstream capital city media. With our film like Frack Nation, I would go to small town newspapers now, and they've become infected with this Woodwardian, Bernsteinian, hold them to the fire. And I'm going, I look at these guys, and they all want a job in DC, so they're going to ask me about the Koch brothers, And I'm going, I'm here presenting a movie with facts in it. Ask me about the movie with the facts in it. Rather than the fact that someone, a guy, an executive from an oil company, gave $120 on a public Kickstarter and put his name there, and he gave $120, and they're leading with that. And I've got 190 people from this small village packed into a hall to hear the truth, and they think And it's, it's this gotcha stuff. And I'm going, like, so local journalism, of course there are many local papers that do provide an information service for their communities. But it's wrong. But now there's all these young journalists, and it was always this way, ambitious, and to be ambitious, they're mini Acostas. They're mini, I don't know who's the equivalent of Jim Acosta in, Owen Jones in the UK.
No, well, exactly. They don't do journalism anymore. They do activism, and they have no shame about that. They think actually that activism is the way forward. But I was just in ecstasies of agreement with what you were saying just then, and I suppose it's obvious, really, because look at what you're doing and look at what I'm doing. I'm pretty much living off the grid now, as far as the media goes, in that okay, I've got Breitbart, but Breitbart is quite left field. The Spectator, I suppose, is the last sort of mainstream media, which is it's got a bit of credibility. But the very fact that you have not got a column in a regular newspaper, I haven't got a column. That's not a function of our lack of talent. It's not that we can't write. It's not that we can't find a story. It's a function of the decline of the media, because we should have. If the mainstream media were worth its salt, we would have columns there, because we are telling the truth.
Well, I mean, it just reminds me of the time that James O'Keefe produced his first Acorn videos, right? And the Washington Post did this whole thing that he was being secretly assisted by this mysterious guy called Andrew Breitbart, right? And they did this whole investigation into his background. And as Mark Stein said at the time, why are you investigating Andrew Breitbart? Why are you not offering him a column? This guy is obviously somebody who thinks differently and deeply and interestingly and funnily, and thinks about things in a whole different way, and worked for Drudge and has an interesting background. And you think that he should be investigated and not offered a column. And the media here, certainly in America, had its moment after the 2016 election, when they could have offered people like Molly Hemingway, people who got it right the last time, columns in serious newspapers. They did not. They doubled down.
It's very interesting, isn't it, that I was onto this coronavirus story in early January. Why did I know? Because a guy who writes for What's Up With That, the skeptical, climate skeptical site, emailed me and said, this China thing is quite interesting. What's going on? I then read Zero Hedge, another kind of maverick left field site, who's been really covering this well. Joe Nova in Australia.
We could add the Epoch Times to that, who've been great.
Yeah, there's lots of people who've been very, very credible on this. People like Cernovich, people like left field people who are not part of the establishment. So they spend their time looking around what's really going on. Now, you could call them, or rather the mainstream media might call them conspiracy merchant, because they don't fit in with the mainstream narrative. It turns out the conspiracy merchants had it right all along. But the second thing, I think that there's interesting parallels about the whole climate change thing, is that one of the things we've learned in those of us who've been following the climate scam for quite some time, is that you have this kind of establishment elite of state-sanctioned official scientists who cleave to a particular narrative, which is based on what? On computer models. And now you've got the same problem. You've got this establishment of scientists, of official kind of government sort of virus experts, who it turns out are basing the shutdown on these models of how the pandemic might turn out. They don't know, and their track record is often very poor. The guy in charge of the UK's policy had a disastrous record with foot and mouth in 2001. And the biggest story in the world right now, what's the biggest story in the world right now? The biggest story in the world right now is that governments right, left and centre are closing down the economy, destroying the economic future of the next few generations, probably, destroying businesses, destroying jobs, in the name of a problem which is not exactly clear. And what is the media doing? The media is going, this is a really scary problem, and so many people are dying with underlying health conditions. Do more, government.
Okay, I think we have to go.
I think we have to go. I think we should ask James, has he any advice for people stuck indoors? What are the Delingpoles doing?
We are watching a lot of, there's an interesting this is terrible. I don't think many American viewers are going to be interested in this, but there's some really good documentaries on Netflix about Formula One and about the Australian cricket team. And I realise that these are probably really, really boring. But one of the things I've noticed is that if you learn a lot about a subject, any subject in great detail, it actually becomes quite interesting.
Yes. We've had an experience of that ourselves. Yeah.
We've been weed. Obviously, I can recommend. Weed gets you through the.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yes. Just want to tell you, we're not encouraging drug use.
Right.
Just be responsible out there. Go ahead, James.
Are you cooking a lot, James?
Cooking, yep. Cooking is obviously really important, yep.
And you're in the countryside, so you're still allowed out without the police coming and asking you what you're doing. Is that correct?
I have to say that as the government becomes more totalitarian, I just think, I'd love to see them try and stop me going out for my morning run. By the way, I have never been fitter than I have been. I've been going. We've started this. Are you familiar with the group the app Strava?
Yes. Oh yes. Oh yes, it's very competitive, right? It's where you boast to your friends about your accomplishments, right?
I can't tell you how bad it's got with my family. One of my brothers is a master of the universe. He's an entrepreneur on his third successful company. He's uber competitive, and there's about 7 or 8 of us in our Strava group. And it's just got vicious. I mean, really, really nasty about, distance covered versus pace versus elevation gained. Just nasty competition.
Attach it to the dog or put it on the washing machine, I believe, as well.
Yeah, you can do that.
You put it in the washing machine, that fixes it as well. So, James, where can people get you?
The Delingpod, which is Delingpod, Delingpod. And and also my website is delingpoleworld.com.
We'll put the links up for everyone on the YouTube version of this, and it'll also be on our Facebook page.
The Anne and Phelim Scoop.
The Anne and Phelim Scoop.
Facebook page. Thanks, James.
Thanks so much, James. Take care.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Stay safe. Bye.
James is great, as always.
A national treasure.
A national treasure, yes. And looking well in his green and pleasant land there. If you're listening to it on a podcast, it's available on YouTube. You can see James in the flesh, and he's sitting in a very beautiful room looking out on a very green and pleasant land. So let's hear about...
Well, talking of Zoom, because we, for the first time, did an interview on Zoom, and actually there's a very good article from Niall Ferguson in the Sunday Times this past weekend. The UK Sunday Times saying, let's Zoom, because everyone's talking about Zoom right now, but he's saying, let's Zoom a conversation with Xi Jinping, because he has a lot of questions to answer. And again, as I said at the beginning, not to confuse him with Niall Ferguson of Imperial College.
Niall Ferguson of the rather dodgy modelling, which said 2 million people would die in America of the coronavirus. Let's see if that happens, and let's see if we should ever pay any attention to models again. But let's go.
So basically, Niall Ferguson says, you may, if you are gripped by our current decadent obsession with cultural inclusivity and sensitivity, not like the fact that the US President Donald Trump has been calling the coronavirus the Chinese virus, but he's entitled to call it that, as people in 1968 were entitled to refer to the influenza A as the Hong Kong flu, because Hong Kong was where the first case was recorded. And he's very, he's very direct. He says basically China caused this disaster, but now wants to claim the credit for saving us from it, liberally exporting testing kits, some of which don't work. The Chinese government is intent on snatching victory from the jaws of defeat it inflicted. The worst of it, that some people in the Western world are so unhinged by Trump derangement syndrome, or so corrupted by Chinese money, or in the case of Italy, so disillusioned by the less than altruistic responses of their fellow Europeans to their exceptionally severe COVID-19 outbreak that they actually swallow this toxic stream of hypocrisy and mendacity. So he said, let's try to restore some sanity here. And let's do that by asking some questions of the Chinese. And he has 5 questions. And they're really good and I think really important. And he said, no matter what happens, and he doesn't expect the Chinese to answer these questions, let's never stop asking these questions. And here's the questions. First, what exactly was going on in Wuhan that led to the initial emergence of the COVID-19 virus? You know, if it originated in one of these disgusting wet markets, why, he asks, have those wet markets not been closed down? But if it originated because of some sloppy practices at the Wuhan branch of the Chinese Center for Disease Control and Prevention, that's worse. It's insanity for research on potentially lethal viruses like that to be going on in the heart of a vast metropolis like Wuhan. How big a role did the central government play in the cover-up after it became clear in Wuhan that there was human-to-human transmission? We now know there were 104 cases of the new disease, including 15 deaths, between December the 12th and the end of the month. Why was the official Chinese line on December the 31st that there was no clear evidence of human-to-human transmission? And why did that official line not change until January the 20th? After it became clear that there was a full-blown epidemic spreading from Wuhan. This is a great question. So this is the 3rd question he asks. After it became clear that there was a full-blown epidemic spreading from Wuhan to the rest of the Hubei province, why was it that you did not cut off travel from Hubei? Why did you cut off travel from Hubei to the rest of China on January the 23rd, but you did not cut off travel from Hubei to the rest of the world? So the Chinese took care of China. They thought it was serious enough to cut off travel from the Hubei province to the rest of China, but they didn't do that to the rest of the world.
Are you suggesting that China adopted a China first policy?
Oh, that would be just such an awful thing.
Yeah, imagine adopting a policy that looks after your citizens first. You know.
And his last line, and the last paragraph of that, and these questions need to be asked and asked and asked and asked over and over again. So his last paragraph, I think it's important for us to hear this. China has a problem. Like Russia's before 1991 is the one-party problem. That's the problem they have, the one-party problem. And so long as a fifth of humanity, my God, like a fifth of humanity are subject to the will of an unaccountable, corrupt and power-hungry organisation with a long history of crimes against its own people, the rest of humanity will not be safe. And I think it'll be, whenever this thing ends, I really hope the world doesn't forget to keep on asking those questions and to make China accountable for what they did and what they didn't do.
Okay, well, you know, it's slightly disconnected, but also connected. There is a manufacturer of face masks in Texas who is not working 24/7. At 5 o'clock, the factory shuts up. And why is that? So the Dallas Morning News did a very interesting article. It's in North Texas, and the owner is Prestige. The company is called Prestige Ameritech, and its owner Mike Bowen. And he's not working 24/7 because he's been here before. During the last H1N1, they begged him for masks. He brought in machinery, brought in workers, trained, ramped up, and once they didn't need him anymore, they dumped him, went to China because it was cheaper there, and left him having to pay unemployment benefits, having to left with this machinery that didn't work, having to gear down, cost him a fortune, almost went bankrupt. He has been begging. He has been writing to everyone. He's saying he warned. And he wrote to the government, he wrote to Obama, he wrote to the state government, the federal government, the Department of Health, and he actually warned that allowing another country, and this is a quote, to serve as our main supplier of personal protection equipment has the potential to become a national security nightmare. Did anyone listen to him? No. So he, and this was on he gave his interview on the Steve Bannon podcast, and you know he was very clear, and he almost, as the local mayor says, he was begging them to understand that we shouldn't have all our masks made in China. He wanted a federal government contract that would keep him in steady business, so that he could fill the gaps, but not have to lose money during the quiet times. And but he's
Obama did not listen to that.
Obama sent him one of those proclamations of "You're a good citizen." You're a good citizen. One of those declarations.
Can you use one of those declarations to pay people?
No, you can't. And so Obama just behave. And here we are, short of masks, depending on China, who is using the masks as a way to gain power around the world by giving them or donating them or selling them cheaply to countries that are desperate for them. So we'll put that article up on our Facebook page, the Alan Phelim Scoop. China, we need to look again at our relationship with China. So let's hear about a doctor who should be...
Oh, yeah, yeah. So, we're moving on to Trump derangement here, and this is just priceless. So anxious is Whoopi Goldberg to throw both Trump and actually his actual administration under the bus that she started fantasizing the other day on The View about, wouldn't it be great if Biden was in charge? My God, wouldn't it be great if Biden was in charge? Do you know what would happen if we had Biden in charge? We'd have Dr. Jill Biden. Dr. Jill Biden, his wife, could be the Surgeon General. Oh my God, how great would that be? How great would that be? Let's watch it.
Klobuchar is almost certainly, I'm certainly going to be on the short list for vice president. I don't know if she'll ultimately be his running mate, but she'll be on that list.
Yeah. I'm hoping Dr. Jill becomes the Surgeon General. His wife. Joe Biden's wife, because he would never do it, but she's a hell of a doctor. She's an amazing doctor.
She's a doctor and PhD. Yeah.
I could be wrong.
I think she's a teacher, but might be good for Betsy DeVos's post.
Yes. Perfect.
Whoopi pretended to have knowledge that she was a great doctor.
Great doctor.
She's not. She's never practiced medicine in her life, Whoopi.
So, just to remind ourselves of exactly what Jill Biden is qualified to do, and you have to ask yourself the question, is this who you want taking care of you during a pandemic? So with this doctor of education, and she got her dissertation, again, this would be very valuable, obviously, during a pandemic. Her dissertation is in student retention at the community college, meeting students' needs. So that's really what you need during a pandemic. That is what she has, a doctorate in education. But again, as Phelim pointed out, she pretends during that section on The View that great doctor.
Yes, she received it in 2007 from the University of Delaware, where that's when her husband was becoming the vice president, I suppose, and was a senior senator. Well, what state was he a senator?
Naughty.
What state was he a senator of?
Delaware.
Oh, where she got her...
Behave. But just to show you the derangement, and this is, by the way, not to point out the very obvious, this is Whoopi Goldberg, African American, throwing the actual Surgeon General under the bus, who happens to be African American, who is also happens to be an actual doctor. Not only is he an actual doctor, he's an actual anesthesiologist with a master's degree in public health from Berkeley, which I think might be very useful during a pandemic. So Jerome Michael Adams is the US Surgeon General, and hats off to him. Great job. But there you go. That's just typical of Whoopi Goldberg. I just loved it. But she couldn't get over herself. She was, Dr. Jill, fantastic. But also another Trump derangement story that I just thought to finish off today, because I know we're kind of running over time a little bit, is New York Times the weekend interviewed Larry David, and it's actually it's a freewheeling interview. It's all about how he's getting on during the coronavirus lockdown. He's in the house with his daughter, and whatever, and how they're all getting on, and his girlfriend, and how he met the girlfriend, all kinds of stuff. But snuck into the middle of all of that is something comes up about Trump. Here's what he says about Trump. When we speak about the president, Mr. David marveled. It's an amazing thing to me. The man has not one redeeming quality. You could take some of the worst dictators in history, and I'm sure that all of them, you could find one decent quality. Stalin could have had one decent quality. We don't know. Honestly, obviously, I want to kind of make a joke of this, but this is an extraordinary thing that the New York Times allowed him away with saying, that he's worse than Stalin, that President Trump is worse than Stalin. This is the same New York Times, by the way, who are really happy to continually report verbatim statistics from the Chinese government, statements from the Chinese government, statements from the WHO, who owned by the Chinese government. And by the way, let's criticize away at President Trump. Go ahead and do that. Knock yourself out, as they say. But here's the New York Times, who allow Larry David away with that horrific, shameless thing to say. When in fact, one thing we do know is that if the Chinese had acted when they should have acted, if they had acted on time, 95% of the people who are dead now because of this virus would not be dead. And that's not an inconsiderable number of people. 95% of 80,000 people as of today. It's almost 80,000 people that have died as we go to this recording here. So put that in your pipe and smoke it, New York Times. Shame on you, and shame on you, Larry David. It is unbelievable. You know, one thing that you should do, Larry David, is get a history lesson on what Stalin really did.
And it's even weirder because when you look at much of Curb Your Enthusiasm, there are actually very conservative themes going through. Larry David's humour is very often about the insane bureaucracy that you have to face, the insane political correctness that you have to face. And Larry David's, of course, character cannot handle bureaucracy, cannot handle political correctness, and just speaks unfiltered. And he gets into trouble because of that. So his whole but a lot of Curb Your Enthusiasm is attack on political correctness, attack on liberal values, attack on the state, attack on the petty bureaucrat. And that's when he's trying to make art, that's what he does. But when he's pandering to a New York Times journalist, he falls back into the anti-Trump, unoriginal thoughts that he has. Interesting, and disappointing.
So we're going to wrap it up here and wish you all well and hope that you're safe and well where you are. But maybe as a kind of because we got all wound up there talking about Stalin and Larry David, let's maybe finish on a kind of a positive and funny note. Obviously, we're spending a lot of time indoors and spending a lot of time looking at our cats, looking at Mr. Scaredy Cat, looking at Mr. Top Cat. And one thing we noticed of late, because we're being more attentive, is that when they're having their snoozes during the day, which of course, as most of you who have cats will know, they sleep for about 18 hours. So they often sleep during the time when it's very bright. We've noticed that they do this kind of shielding of their faces with the big paw comes over to try and block out the light. And we were thinking perhaps we could make a fortune. You know the way people come up with brilliant ideas during some kind of an emergency. Imagine if we could come up with an idea of making face masks for cats or eye masks for cats like people have, and we use them. And just to show you like where we came up with this idea, here's some photographs of Mr. Scaredy Cat trying to get rid of block the light while he's having one of his numerous daily naps. Take care, and we'll talk to you next time.
Be safe out there. Bye.